Hello everyone, and welcome to the Darkest Hour. I'm your host, Amanda Jane. When you think of human existence on Earth, do you generally feel like we're alone? Aside from the other known species living among us, are we alone? I'm not just talking about unidentified flying objects in the sky. There's plenty of experiences that lead me to believe or theorize we aren't alone at all. Maybe it's when someone takes a moment to visit a family member's grave, or simply just thinks about their loved one. They're alone, but suddenly they're not. You smell their perfume, you hear their voice, sometimes you even see them. It makes you wonder, where are they now? And where were they then? Our world is intertwined with something else, maybe multiple somethings. Perhaps it's because our worlds are so closely intertwined with others that we sometimes can see things that we shouldn't be able to see, or experience things that are considered unbelievable. Well, I'm not claiming to have any answers, but I sure enjoy the stories that open up the thoughts. So, let's get started, shall we? For as long as I can remember, I've had an interest in the spiritual world and thought it would be cool to communicate with the dead. Back in 2014, my mom was browsing the local Facebook buying and selling group. She came across someone selling a used Ouija board. It caught her attention because it was glow-in-the-dark, limited edition, so she bought it for me. She played with one as a child and thought that I would enjoy it too. It was a stormy, gloomy, almost spooky day when the seller brought us the board. As soon as I saw it, I got a bad vibe. Once the guy left, I told my mom I didn't feel safe using it. I wanted to do some research first. She was surprised at my reaction, considering how interested I'd been in playing with it, but I ended up watching YouTube videos and hearing some pretty bad stories. They made me feel even more uncomfortable about trying it. Ultimately, Mom boxed it up and left it on our porch. It stayed there for many years. This brings us to spring of 2022. By now, I'd gotten really interested in the paranormal. I knew a lot more about Ouija boards, especially how dangerous they could be. I reached out to my mom and asked if she remembered the board from years ago. I advised her to get rid of it, saying that it could bring bad luck and negative energy. It's weird, because since moving to this house in 2014, we hadn't had a lot of good experiences. But apparently, she'd gotten rid of it the last time she reorganized the porch. Now, let's fast forward a little more. I go to school in a different part of the country, but return to my mom's house each summer. Once home, I started hearing strange stuff in my bedroom, like whispering. I thought it was just the air conditioner, but it honestly sounded like voices, and I'd never heard anything similar until that summer. I also sensed the Ouija board was still in the house. I went looking for it, and I eventually found the Ouija box, tucked away in a clear storage bin, so I grabbed it and took it to my mom. As we looked in the box, we noticed it was different. The board in the box looked like new. When we opened it, the planchette was still in its own separate wrap. This was not how we remembered the board. When Mom got it from the guy, it had been used. The box had some wear and tear, and the planchette wasn't wrapped in anything. At this point, we're both weirded out and just wanted it out of the house. I'd heard that Ouija boards could come back and change if not disposed of properly. For the time being, we put it in the backyard until we could figure out how to get rid of it. It was finally out of the house, but leaving it on our property wasn't a smart move. Bad things started happening. My father got into a minor car accident, the first one of his entire life. Our basement flooded with town sewage. Nasty, I know. Before this, our basement had only gotten wet once, when someone left the window open during a storm. When a handyman came over, the guy almost fell through our basement stairs. He wasn't hurt, but it really scared Mom. She ended up getting the stairs replaced, even though it was very expensive. Then the scariest thing of all happened to Dad. There was a big fire in his apartment building. Multiple units were destroyed, including one right above him. Thankfully, no one was injured, but his unit did suffer some water damage, so he was forced to move out. It would take at least 6 months for renovations. The final incident happened while the Ouija board was still in the backyard. Mom and I noticed that we didn't have any hot water, so we went to the basement. We discovered the water heater wasn't working. We tried to reset it, but we couldn't get it back on. A repairman came to check it out and he said that the unit had overheated. Fortunately, there was a safety setting that had shut it off before getting dangerously hot. He then explained that the water heater's thermostat was faulty. Otherwise, it would have never gotten that hot. If the safety switch hadn't shut it off, it could have blown up. We were lucky. One thing I noticed is that even with all of these close calls, no one was harmed. It was almost as if someone or something was watching out for us. After the last thing happened with the hot water heater, Mom and I agreed that the Ouija board had to go. It was bringing us bad luck, and we worried that things could only get worse. Even my dad was having bad luck, but my parents were divorced, and he'd never lived in that house. Mom decided to take it to the town dump. She separated the board and the planchette so she could toss them in 2 separate garbage bins. As she was driving to the dump, she noticed something odd at the neighbor's house. There was a vintage hearse from the 70s parked in the driveway. She texted me about it. I agreed it was weird, but people do buy old hearse sometimes. Mom then disposed of the Ouija board and returned home. On her way back, she drove past the neighbor's house and noticed the hearse was gone. There was only a dumpster that had been sitting in the driveway. Mom had never seen a hearse in the neighbor's driveway before that day. She hasn't seen one since. It's also worth noting that the driveway was too short for both a hearse and a dumpster to be parked there at the same time. Later that week, Mom and I were at Barnes & Noble, decided to have a coffee at their Starbucks. Guess what we saw when we dropped off our serving tray? Tucked away near the milk and sugar was a Ouija board. I know they sell them at Barnes & Noble, and I guess someone could have just left it there, but it still freaked us out. Hey everyone. I have a ton of stories about the time I lived in Scotland with my friend Jane, and what I'm about to tell you is far more terrifying than ghosts. Jane and I used to go dancing at nightclubs near Buchanan, a popular area in Glasgow. We used to meet nice people there. They were usually drunk, but funny and harmless, all except for Kyle. Kyle kept staring at Jane with a really weird look, so I pretended to be her brother. It didn't discourage him, though. He started overtly hitting on her while waving around his glass of whiskey. It clearly bothered her to be approached like this. He showed no respect for her personal space. Jane tried laughing to lighten the mood, without success. I eventually broke off the conversation, but Kyle and his dumb friend followed us everywhere. Then he crossed the line. by taking a secret picture of Jane. I didn't want to get kicked out of a place that we liked, so in a soft, no-pressure way, I kindly asked him to stop, and he actually seemed okay. While we were dancing with Jane, Kyle made the gesture of moving his fingers across his throat, and she totally lost it. Once she told me, we immediately ran away and we hid from Kyle, who also wasn't showing himself for the moment. When the club closed, Jane and I went to get fast food while waiting for the bus. She was feeling very uncomfortable after our experience. She actually survived an attempt on her life when an ex-boyfriend's brother tried to stab her. He'd already killed his mother and wanted to stab Jane's ex too. Now he's in a psychiatric hospital. Knowing that she was upset, I tried to change the subject and make her laugh, but Kyle and his friend suddenly appeared out of nowhere. Their shirts were stained with blood, and as they came closer, Kyle told us of fighting a guy in the street and bragged about always carrying a knife. After the trauma Jane experienced, she wasn't susceptible to this bad boy stuff, even if he was proud of it. I asked him to leave, and the situation grew tense. He clearly wanted to hit me. Bless the guard who kicked him out. When we returned to France over a year later, we thought this incident was finally behind us, but Kyle managed to find her on Tinder. I hope we never see that loser again. This is a story about an old house in a rural part of central Massachusetts. The house was originally half of a hotel. The other half was nearby. For some reason, that always perplexed me. The two halves were separated. It was one huge 3-story Victorian structure with wide porches. My parents were friends with the homeowners. They would host big parties. The mother would sing and play the piano. There were always lots of kids. We ran around while the adults socialized. Of course, this was over 40 years ago, so my memories of the house are vague. I remember the house had more rooms than the family could ever use. On the 3rd floor were several hotel rooms, still largely unchanged since it was in operation. The owners openly talked about the house being haunted, and I was always fascinated by their stories. Odd things would happen, such as finding the phone receiver out of its cradle, or sometimes light bulbs went missing, unscrewed from the socket and spirited away. The incident that left the deepest impression supposedly happened to the mother. One afternoon, she was vacuuming on the 3rd floor when she turned to see a man standing in the room, motionless and staring. He wore a gray suit, wire-rimmed glasses. He never spoke. He just stood there, staring. Caught off guard and flustered, she said the first thing that came to mind, "Would you like a cup of coffee?" He vanished before her eyes. I never understood why someone would offer a cup of coffee to an apparition, but my mother explained it as being aware of a presence. She felt it was benevolent and wanted it to feel welcome. Sorry, there isn't more to share. I wonder if the house is still there today. My name is Zach. I don't believe in ghosts, but my experience still haunts me. I just can't really explain what I've seen, felt, and heard. When my mother was with her ex-boyfriend, we moved into his house. It was yellow, built in 1970, and located in the Seminahina countryside, near Paris. The last owners were probably an old couple, but I never asked. That was in 2011. I spent 3 years there before my mom and stepfather separated. Among the strange events that occurred, I remember the reversed cross on the garage ceiling. It was caused by humidity, but every time we fixed it, the shape always reappeared on the same spot. My cat used to yell like he was in pain when he walked beneath the cross, but I assumed it was pure coincidence. One night, a friend slept over while my family was away. I had to get something from my mom's bedroom, and I felt like I was being watched. Mom used to hate her room because she sometimes woke up thinking a stranger was lying next to her. When I returned to my room, my friend was terrified. Her face was blank as she described seeing something through the window. It was probably a bird or an owl, but the creepy feeling was mutual. One of the craziest episodes happened during a party. We were talking with two friends while standing near a Buddha statue and mirrors. We were calm. No one was on any drugs. Then, all of the mirrors suddenly fell, and the statue's head was sliced off, while the body remained standing. Everyone was shocked and asking for an explanation. Maybe it was the temperature, but it was just a regular April night. I don't remember any weird weather issues. Then there's a story about why we replaced our TV so often. The screen used to activate itself, change channels even when we were watching something. Technicians said it was something they couldn't fix because the device was too old. Did I mention the bathroom mirror? Yeah, I know it sounds cliche, but I never saw ghosts in the mirror. It was always dirty, even if we cleaned it on a daily basis. It reminds me of the inverted cross. Anyway, my fiancé and I now have our own flat. It's a cool atmosphere, but sometimes I think about my nights in that yellow house. Ghosts or not, there's definitely something haunting my memories. When I was younger, I spent half of the week living with my ex Christopher in central Paris, near Rue Carducci Park. It was easier to stay in the city since I studied at university from Monday to Friday. Christopher and I maintained a mutual friendship with his ex-girlfriend, Alice. I know, please don't judge me. Back in the day, the three of us slept in the same room and shared a powerful relationship together. It was almost like a love triangle, but anyway, my experience isn't about our personal story. Alice and Christopher are sensitive people who feel energies and spirits. I never judged them since I also experienced baffling situations, but hey, I wanted to stay pragmatic. I can't explain what happened on those nights when Christopher and I talked in our sleep. Alice listened and told us everything in the morning. It happened a few times, but I have no memory of the events. She was absolutely sure we were speaking in tongues. There's no doubt about that. The disturbing part is that we don't understand or read Latin. She even took notes when we realized some of the sentences were from the Bible, some of them related to Lazarus. While Christopher is a devout Catholic, I'm not a religious person at all. Of course, I've read and studied the Bible and other religious books, but I cannot tell you entire parts from my memory. Since Alice is sensitive to this invisible world, she felt it was something disturbing and unusual. I often laugh and talk while I'm fully asleep, but this Latin episode never happened again. There's always this stereotype about creepy legends in Latin, especially because religion is often used by the media to play with our deepest fears. Do you think it's possible for our minds to use forgotten data to do this seemingly impossible? Do you have any alternative theories? Could it be related to ghosts or other entities? Sometimes I think about this whole experience and I still can't figure out what happened. Thanks for your theories and possible explanations. I'd like to share an experience I had in my late teens, early 20s. I'll try to keep it short, but it may be connected with previous experiences from my parents' first home. That place was definitely haunted, and so was our second home. That's where I experienced the most activity. I had difficulty sleeping for years, which resulted in a bunch of other problems. One night, I had my craziest experience, but I was never able to determine what it was. At one point, I believed it was an astral projection, but after watching some documentaries, it felt more like an alien abduction or something demonic. That night, I got home late, immediately tried going to sleep. I wasn't mentally tired, but I was physically exhausted from work and spending the evening with friends. While falling asleep, I heard a piercing white noise that rose in volume by the second, and suddenly, I was above my bed, entirely awake and aware. I could still see myself in bed. I also felt completely paralyzed. The white noise became so loud that it felt like the whole room was shaking. Then, a beam of white light shot through my ceiling and lifted me into the air. In the corner of the room, I could see black shadow figures coming closer, surrounding me. I was terrified and screaming at the top of my lungs, but it didn't matter. The white noise seemed to block my desperate cries for help, but I kept screaming, and eventually, I just woke up, extremely terrified. I know most people will think I'm crazy or say it was a nightmare, but I've had lots of nightmares. This was definitely not one of them. I wanted to know if anyone else had similar experiences and see what they believe it to be. I've never had any experiences that I can definitively call paranormal, but this one shook me to the core. It happened a few months ago, but I remember it vividly. At roughly 1:30 a.m. on September 7th, I was alone in my room and the only one still awake in the house. I was talking to my girlfriend. She and I sleep together on the phone every night, and everything was completely normal. The only light was the phone screen directly in front of me. My room is always pitch black with the lights off, so it wasn't scary. That's not what spooked me. As my girlfriend told me about her day at work, I heard a very low voice say something. It originated near my door, and it was almost a whisper. I couldn't understand the words, but I could tell it was speech. I asked my girlfriend to hold on and listened closely. At first, I thought it was my brother. His room is next to mine, but he was already asleep. He does the same routine before bed every night. He uses the restroom, turns off the hall light, closes his door, turns off his light. He'd finished his routine an hour before I heard someone speak, and the strange voice was too deep to be his anyway. My brother is 15. I know his pitch and what he sounds like through the walls. This wasn't him. I heard it as clearly as if it was standing in my room, right by the door. I tried using my flashlight to look without getting out of bed, but I didn't see anything. After looking around for a few minutes, I told my girlfriend we should go to sleep. The next morning, I woke up as usual, and nothing scary has happened since. name is Alex, and I want to share an encounter I had. In October 2021, my girlfriend and I bought a small 2-bedroom apartment for ourselves and daughter. Before moving in, we had to do some renovations like replacing the floors and painting. It was mid-November when we finally finished and moved in. It's on the first floor of a big block, and it may be small, but it's also cozy. The front door enters into a small hallway. Directly across is my daughter's room. To the left are 3 doors: the master bedroom, the toilet, and the bathroom. Next to the front door is a small window with a mirror on the left, along with the living dining room and kitchen. Obviously, when you try to renovate in a rushed timeline, not everything's going to be completely finished when you move in. The door to the living room or dining room wasn't done, so we removed it until we could paint it. We feel safer with our bedroom door open in case our daughter wakes up or has a bad dream. Since I sleep on the side of the bed nearest the door, I can see down the hallway and into that mirror. One night, I woke up around 2 a.m., and in the mirror, I saw the bathroom light was on. Since my girlfriend was still laying next to me, I thought one of us simply forgot to turn it off before bed and thought no more of it. The following morning, I went to the toilet, and as I sat with the door slightly ajar, I looked into the mirror and saw something move in the bathroom. The door was slightly cracked, so I thought it was one of our cats. As I walked out of the room, I looked in the mirror again, and I saw a figure through the crack in the door. That's when my heart started racing and pounding. I shook my head, trying to brush it off, and I slowly moved to the bathroom door. At the exact moment I reached to open it, I saw my 2 cats were suddenly sitting next to me, and I almost jumped through the ceiling. I scratched their heads, but they didn't ask for more attention like they normally do. Instead, they just stared blankly at the bathroom door. That's when I paused to look in the mirror again, and I saw a face looking at me through the crack in the door. I rubbed my eyes, turned my head towards the door, and gave it a hard, fast push. When it opened, there was a double of myself standing inside, looking at the bathroom sink and mirror. I fully froze at that moment. I couldn't move, speak, or yell, and my heart was racing. I tried to leave or close my eyes, hoping it was all a dream, but I couldn't do anything. Then it turned towards me and said, "Keep doing what you're doing. You're doing the right thing, for now." When it finished speaking, I could suddenly close my eyes, and when I opened them, it was gone. I quickly turned out the lights, closed the door, and took the cats to bed where we could try to get some sleep. Somehow, the alarm clock still read 2 a.m., and I woke up with my girlfriend at 7. I didn't tell her about this encounter because it could have just been a nightmare. In the past, I've visited a sleeping clinic because I dream a lot, and I always feel tired after waking up, even if I've slept for several hours. Anyways, we did our morning routine, and as we drove our little girl to school, I realized my experience wasn't a dream. I knew it really happened when my girlfriend asked if I left the bathroom light on again. I looked at her, my face pale, and just nodded. I didn't tell her anything because I don't want her to think I'm crazy. For the record, I didn't take any medication or drink any alcohol. But yeah, that was my first encounter. A few weeks later, I came home around 10:30 after working the late shift, and everyone was already asleep. As usual, my dinner was in the microwave, and I played some video games while watching YouTube. At 12:30, I went to bed, but first I checked on our daughter and gave her a kiss. I laid next to my girlfriend and fell asleep almost instantly. I was sleeping pretty well until 4, when I woke up facing away from the door, with my arm around my girlfriend. I kissed her head before rolling over, and that's when I realized there was a light on in the living room. Not thinking much of it, I went to the toilet and heard a sound coming from the kitchen. My heart started pounding again, and I remembered the previous incident for the first time since it happened. I instantly knew it wasn't one of the cats, because they were both lying at the foot of our bed. A broom was the first thing that I could get my hands on, and I went with it. I crept to the kitchen, ready to attack. When I came around the table, I was ready to swing my broom like a champ. But I stopped immediately upon realizing my girlfriend was standing there, fully dressed for work, and shaking me because I was practically attacking her. She looked scared and asked if everything was okay. I touched her to see if she was real, and she was. I asked why she was up in the middle of the night, but she looked confused and said that she was getting ready for work. I ran to the bedroom to look at who I kissed, but the bed was empty. She followed me and asked what I was doing, so I told her. It freaked her out. She'd woken up before me, so nobody else was in the bed when I thought I kissed her. But I'm still certain that something or someone was lying next to me, and she looked exactly like my girlfriend. Nothing like this has happened since, but sometimes it feels like someone is on my terrace, or when I'm wearing headphones and everyone is asleep, I still hear my name being called. So yeah, this is a little story of mine, and one of many reasons I'm into such things. Thanks for reading, and stay safe, people. You never know what can happen at night. When my mother was a child, she spent her early years in a remote part of Mexico. There was no electricity, no running water or air conditioning. Due to several people living in one small house, it wasn't uncommon for her and a few siblings to sleep on the porch. Yes, they literally slept outside on pallets. Mom recalls some nights were actually much cooler on the screened porch. My grandfather actually built the house with his own hands, and the closest neighbors were miles away. The house was pretty much in the middle of nowhere. Now, on with the ghost story. Mom and 3 of her siblings were the ones lucky enough to sleep outside, and they never had any problems until the baker boy started coming around. He was a small child with golden curls. He wore a white baker's uniform and a mask made of real pigskin. He would walk around the house in circles, reciting a phrase in some foreign language that Mom never understood. At first, Mom and the others were frightened, but with each encounter, they grew to appreciate the baker boy's presence. It was almost as if he were protecting them from whatever fate he suffered himself. They never knew who he was or if he was even real, just that they all saw him. My grandpa always assumed they were making it up so they could come inside, but they swore everything was true. Over time, an outline of the baker boy's path began to appear around the house. And needless to say, the family moved soon after. The strangest part is that before Grandpa died, he said he finally saw the blonde boy with the pig mask. My parents recently told me that I talked to ghosts between the ages of 4 and 5. I always spoke to a man standing in front of my window, and when I was asked who I was talking to, I answered George. I have no memory of what I would talk about, but my parents, they were close to Mr. Todd, the old man who lived next door. Mom eventually learned that the man who owned the house before us was named George, and Mr. Todd said he spent most of his days staring out the bedroom window. I've been told I was a very strange child, and this isn't the only ghost I spoke with. My parents said that I also talked to a man on top of the wardrobe, but unfortunately, I haven't been told as much about this one. It's always overshadowed by George. I would discuss having a past life and regularly bring up my other family. I feel like I had a past life in the World War I or World War II era. My brother, who is 7 years older, said I once started singing an old war song that no one else had ever heard before. As a believer in past lives, I'm fascinated to have my own experience, but frustrated to be limited by my young memory. Well, friends, it appears we've reached the end of tonight's episode, but don't miss a brand new one every Friday night, and my other weekly uploads every Sunday and Wednesday. Appreciate it if you would like this video, and of course, talk to me in the comments. A huge shout out to my patrons whom I appreciate so very much. Seriously, you're the best. Tracy S., Monica L., ZOEWATT, Shelly B., Donald C., Rat Girl, Alicia S., Erin G., Nikki H., Mr. Revenant, Naz K., and Brendan G. If you want to support The Darkest Hour in other ways, consider joining my Patreon. Check out patreon.com/thedarkesthour or click the link in the description to learn more. I want to thank those who shared their stories, and a big thanks to all of you for listening. Do you have stories like these? I'd love to share them. Send them to me, amandadarkesthour@gmail.com, or on the Darkest Hour subreddit, The Darkest Hour YT. Stay spooky.